CHRISTE is a gathering of Christian scholars and specialized practitioners who seek to engage in ecumenical Christian thought with a special focus on cross-disciplinary studies relevant to contextual issues impacting contemporary society, and to promote the study of Christian theology and interfaith dialogue among the Christian populace in order to facilitate a germination of Christian theological reflection. You can find out more about this platform at www.christeonline.org. And one of the ways that this group engages the public is through its writings and seminars, which is why we're here today. So just to give you a little overview of what's happening today, we're going to have all the contributors of the book talk a little bit about their work. They're going to talk about 10 minutes each. This will be followed by a little launch ceremony. It won't be anything much. We're all just going to turn on our videos, unmute ourselves, make some noise, simulate a real party of, we can't really shake hands, so virtual handshakes a little bit. Save all your questions for the end. After that, we will have some time, about 20 minutes or so of Q&A. And if all goes smoothly, we hope to end around 4:30, thereabouts. So we're going to kick off the program, but before I invite the contributors, I'd like us to take a moment to honor the late Cornelius Cardinal Sim. Just as an introduction, His Eminence Cornelius Cardinal Sim was the Vicar Apostolic of Brunei Darussalam. He was also the president of the Regional Episcopal Commission for Social Communications of Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei in the Roman Catholic Church. CHRISTE was actually established in August 2020 with his support, and he was our inaugural ecclesiastical patron. So Cardinal Sim passed away from cancer in May this year. So today we have with us Mr. Frederick Sim, his youngest brother, to say a few words. Mr. Frederick Sim currently lives and works in Brunei with his wife, Pauline. He has 2 children who are currently doing their tertiary studies. And during the last phase of the late Cardinal's life, when he traveled abroad for treatment, Mr. Frederick Sim was his primary caregiver. So we're very honored to have him here today. So please welcome him on to the digital stage to share a few thoughts, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Yeah, hi, thank you, Mengyo. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Very good afternoon to all the participants in our ASEAN time zone. I gather there are also some participants further afield of ASEAN. So to those of you, perhaps a very good morning. Let me just start by saying that it gives me great pleasure indeed. In fact, I feel very honored to have been invited in some way to participate in this occasion today. So when Deacon Sherman sent me the program last week and I read a speech honoring the late Cornelius Cardinal Sim, I told Deacon, what am I supposed to say? So anyway, in the spirit of keeping things maybe a little bit less formal, let me introduce myself. As Mengyo said, my name is Fred, and I'm the youngest of Cardinal's 5 siblings. Cardinal was the eldest of us. So I have another 2 brothers and sisters between Cardinal and me. And I suppose today I speak mostly for myself, perhaps, but in many ways also on behalf of the rest of my family. And certainly, as I take this opportunity to thank CHRISTE and its committee, the benefactors and all the team members that contribute so much time and energy in the work that you do, which is also a continuation of the work that our dear Cardinal was very much dedicated to and felt very passionate about. It really does bring a great feeling of warmth, knowing that his own efforts during his life will continue to bear fruit as a result of your collective commitment. So I'm particularly touched that you take every opportunity to recall, to remember, and to honor his memory in what you do. And I think certainly worthy of mention, of course, was the recent launching of the Professorial Chair for Theology and Dialogue in Cardinal's name. Congratulations, Deacon Chairman, for being assigned to this chair. You surely struck on life's lottery there. but really, I think that there is no better choice of a candidate for this role, and I'm sure that our Cardinal is somewhere nodding away his approval. I have to admit that as his family, perhaps we were not always totally clued up with the many roles and specific areas of interest that our brother spent his time on, certainly beyond the borders of our own nation, Brunei. But for sure, the recent months following his untimely demise, it started to become more vividly evident to us, I think, as tributes started to pour in and to be published from various individuals and entities, that he was very much involved beyond just our own vicariate, and actually how much he was looked up to, and I think very simply how much he was loved. Often, I think, as his family, we found we had to somewhat compete for his time, especially with all his travels, on his pilgrimages, on his various conferences and conventions, helping out in workshops all over the place. But the one thing I think that became very obvious to us was that he never seemed to tire of these commitments. And in fact, it was rather quite the opposite. He seemed to draw much strength and even vitality each time he came back. He always had some things to share with us folks at home. And we could tell that for him, the business of the Lord was never ever done with. And he was always looking for the next opportunity to progress whatever it was he had set his mind to or had committed to take on further. To be honest, I often wondered what Deacon Sherman and the Splendor community, particularly, what they fed Cardinal with, because that seemed to keep him so spirited with lively vigor, every time he comes back from one of those visits. And I have to say that it was always good to see that when he chose he chose to spend his efforts on were also the very same ventures that gave him so much pleasure and such sense of achievement. And I really think these became for him like pretty much a perpetual source of almost tireless resolve, I would say, and motivation, to pursue his mission both at home and abroad. So I really see that the energy that CHRISTE and the team expends in all your projects is really an extension of that same energy and passion that our Cardinal very much exuded, I think, in his life. So it does give me great comfort to know that his mission has not concluded with his departure from us, but rather through your ongoing work and commitment, I feel very much, his presence will remain with us. That gives me and certainly my family great pride, and it goes a long way to helping us to move with what was a truly sad event in our lives. But so, just to conclude, I wish all the speakers and participants a great session today. Thank you again for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I feel really pleased to be here. Just to finish, may our good Lord and Shepherd bless the team, CHRISTE, and all of us today and in the days to come. So shalom.
Thank you, Mr. Frederick Sim, for those words. That's a great way to kickstart today's program. So we're going to move on now. We're going to have our 5 contributors. So I'm going to invite now Dr. Jonathan Chan to present on his chapter, Reflections on the Theology of Communication. So Dr. Jonathan Chan is a Malaysian, and he serves as a lecturer in theology at St. Paul's Theological College, as an Anglican Theological College in Kuala Lumpur. His PhD in philosophical theology was obtained at the University of Bristol in the UK. So Dr. Chan is a research fellow in theology and philosophy at CHRISTE. So I'm going to invite him now. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Ming-Yo. May I just start by saying a thank you to Dr. Sherman for his invitation to write for this lovely little book, and to the other authors as well. It's been a real honor to be part of this project. Now for the chapter. As it says on the tin, my paper is an attempt to reflect upon the theology of communication. And for the purposes of the book, I begin by taking theology to be speech or conversation about God. And I take communication to be the conveying of information regardless of the medium. No doubt these are somewhat simplified definitions, but hopefully sufficient for what we have in mind here. Now, a cursory survey of the literature regarding communication in theology typically yields what I have categorized as human-to-human communication. That is, concerning the trends and manner of speaking and sharing the gospel from one person or group of people to another, and the various uses of media and technology toward this aim. And no doubt this is a large part of what a theology of communication may entail, but as I have hoped to have argued here, there is more to it than just that. So given the definitions outlined at the start, we can see that theology itself intimately involves communication in at least two senses. The first, in terms of charisma, which is the preaching, pronouncement, and spreading of the gospel, is of course that example of human-to-human communication that we've just talked about. But second, within our understanding of doctrine and our interpretation of the actual content of the theology that we propagate, there is much to do with communication. Indeed, theology is grounded in the fact that God himself has communicated his being to us, not least through the incarnation, that act in which the word assumes humanity. So in addition to human agency, once we begin to consider God, there are additional examples of the types of communications between agents, namely between God to God, the persons of the Trinity itself, and between God and human beings. Now, as we consider communication between these different types of agents, we move from the more to the less abstract. And let me try and unpack this. When we think about the persons of the Trinity communicating with one another, we have to consider concepts that are not altogether familiar to us. Concepts such as timelessness, the existing outside and without the succession of time, immateriality, existing without physical properties, and so on. All these things that pertain simply to the divine being. And these are complicated and ideas that are difficult to wrestle with. And when we move on and we think about God communicating with humans, there is still that issue which remains a side of the conversation that still exemplifies these unfamiliar properties. For example, in the incarnation, we consider what it means for the word to take on a human nature. This is no less perplexing than what we might think goes on in the Trinity, but at least we can understand one element of this act of communication, and that is what it is like to be human. When God speaks to us, as he did when he spoke to Abraham and many others throughout history, we may still have questions about what precisely is going on in God, as he's a temporal being outside time and space. What is he experiencing? What's happening when he's engaged in conversation? But again, we have an idea what it is like from the human side to participate in such conversation. So those are examples of communication from the divine to the divine, and an example of communication from the divine to the human. And lastly, when we arrive at human-to-human communication, we don't have to give it a second thought, given that we are immersed in and completely familiar with time and the physical reality which we take for granted. So these are the three categories of communication that I address in the paper. There are, of course, non-human and non-divine entities, such as spiritual beings and animals, and I don't address them here in the paper due to considerations of space. But they would still be a fascinating. To consider at perhaps a later stage, how spiritual beings such as angels and demons might communicate with one another and with humans, and how humans may have communicated with the creatures in the Garden of Eden. And so after looking at these three types of communication, I conclude in the paper that the idea and practice of communication is inseparable from theology, and that a theology of communications has a broader scope than one might initially think, and each of us has a role to play in communicating grace to one another in the life of the church. And so that's a whistle-stop summary of the paper in the book. Thank you very much.
Dr. Chan, it's very interesting as you're going through all the different things that we have to think about beyond our own human understanding in order to understand the theology of communication in God. You know, that in itself, you can start to feel your brain starting to squeeze a little bit, but that's what we're here for. Thanks for the little prompt that we can start thinking about these very complex issues. So we're going to move on to our second speaker for today. All right, and we have with us Reverend Deacon Professor Dr. Sherman Craig, who needs no introduction. His paper is The Great Digital Continent, the Intensifying Challenge of Intermirifica. Reverend Deacon Professor Dr. Sherman Craig serves as a permanent deacon of the Catholic Church. He travels around the region to teach in academic and non-academic contexts. His Doctor of Theology degree was conferred by Trinity Theological College in Singapore, and he is the Cornelius Cardinal Sim Professor of Theology and Dialogue at CHRISTE. Over to you.
Thanks, Meng-Yo. And thank you, Jonathan, for the wonderful presentation. I hope I can do as well as you. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all my colleagues who are also my dear friends who have contributed to this book project. I think it has been a very meaningful exercise for every one of us. And as I edited this book, I also found myself learning a lot, because we all come from different areas of expertise. So there is certainly a lot about communication that I don't know, especially from perspectives outside of the usual field of theology. So I found myself learning a lot and being very enlightened by this book project. And I'm sure that all of you will find it beneficial for yourself as well. Well, so our methodology at CHRISTE is usually defined in this manner. We begin with theological reflection. All right, we think about a topic that is relevant to society, relevant to faith, relevant to life, and we do a theological reflection on it, as Dr. Jonathan has just done in the previous presentation. And then we also think about it from the perspective of our various Christian traditions that we come from. Not all of us are from the same tradition. All of us come from different Christian traditions. So we think about it of that topic from the Christian traditions that we come from, and also do some kind of a reflection, say, of how that works out, or how that issue or that subject matter pans out in the life of the church. And then we also proceed from there to reflect on the ethical considerations or the ethical implications of these theological reflections that we have done, how that impacts life, and what it means to live the Christian life from that perspective of that subject matter in society. All right, so basically we are applying faith to life so that we know what it means to be Christians in the world. So that is the whole emphasis of CHRISTE. All right, so my particular topic or essay that I wrote for this book is entitled The Great Digital Continent, the Intensifying Challenge of Intermirifica. Intermirifica, for those of you who are not familiar, is one of the 16 documents that were released by the Second Vatican Council that convened from 1962 to 1965, where about I can't remember how many bishops it was already, quite a few thousand bishops met together with the Pope from 1962 to 1965 to discuss various issues in the life of the church. And so Intermirifica was one of the earliest documents that were promulgated at this council. So a lot of what I'm sharing today pertaining to this document is related, of course, directly to the Catholic Church, but that doesn't mean that it's irrelevant to those of you who come from other traditions, because I think being Christians, all our churches are confronted by the same challenge, right? Because we exist in the same society, and so we are confronted by the same challenge that the modern times present us. So I think this whole idea of communications is very significant because the Second Vatican Council in the early 1960s was the first church council, the first Roman Catholic Church council that was ever televised live. Prior to that, we did not have any kind of communication platforms other than print. Okay, so it was the Second Vatican Council that was a kind of a modern council where the proceedings of the council were televised. And the council fathers, the bishops who were present at this council, actually said quite a lot of things about the challenge confronting the church in terms of communication. And it actually, when you read that document, you'll find that it's quite prophetic, you know, because a lot of things that they were talking about, I really do sincerely wonder if these church fathers even knew what they were actually speaking about, because many of these things that they were referring to didn't actually really exist during their time. So what they said was projected by prophetic foresight. Whereas for us today, as we read the document Inter Mirifica, it's reading it on hindsight. So for them, they were saying things that were yet to be. And this was the early 1960s. There was no public accessibility to the World Wide Web. There was no internet that was accessible to the public. And communications was still very limited by the standards of today. But yet this document already begins acknowledging the prospects and pitfalls of communications in the modern world. And the main aim of this document was actually to give a very specific mandate to the church, or to the people of the church. And this mandate was to instill a human and Christian spirit into these media, into communications media, to instill a human and Christian spirit into these media. And the bishops instructed, the council instructed for the universal church to establish and sustain social communications apostolates. That means we were supposed to develop social communications infrastructures in our own dioceses, in our own territories, in our own churches. And that was a very concrete instruction that was issued by this council. Now, more than 60 years after, when we look back, well, how far have we gone? I think development all around the world in terms of communications development in the Catholic Church has been varied depending on which region you come from, and how much infrastructure is available to you, and how much money you can afford to invest into developing these infrastructures. But what I say in my paper, in this chapter of the book, is basically that the challenge of running this, of engaging in communications today, has become more complicated than ever before because of the widespread accessibility of the World Wide Web now, and also especially the emergence of the new media. And I think that significantly complicates the challenge that we are trying to address in the Catholic Church, and I'm sure also those of you who come from various other Christian communities. With the emergence of the new media, communications now has been democratized. It means everyone has access to it. Everyone is able to publish their thoughts online. Everyone has a voice and is able to say something to communicate to the rest of the world. And if prior to this, before the internet, in order for you to say something, you actually had to write to get yourself published, and you had to have the printing company to print your writings. Now, just with a click of a mouse or your trackpad, within a couple of minutes or within a few seconds, in fact, your thoughts will be published and thousands of people can read them. In other words, your thoughts can go out to the world live. And that complicates the challenge that confronts the church today in terms of engaging in social communication. But despite the potentials that are presented by infrastructure, communications infrastructure today, this development also brings a lot of psychological, social, and emotional challenges, pitfalls, problems. And I think one of the main issues that we are facing, as has been pointed out in the past couple of weeks on the news, is that the corporations who are running these platforms, they are enjoying excessive profits, very often at the expense of the well-being of the consumers, the users of these platforms. And if you are following the news, I'm sure you will be following the issue of the case of the whistleblower, Miss Frances Haugen, who has blown the whistle about what Facebook has been doing. All right, so the case is ongoing and the debates are still raging on this matter. But this is a very typical example, case in point of communications presenting us with a problem. It brings about a challenge in society, because people who access these platforms are being affected psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and definitely spiritually. So how do we address these issues as the church, rather than just waiting for the corporations to address them, because the corporations are profit motivated. So to wait for legislation to be enacted in order for these issues to be addressed effectively, I think it's waiting for something that may never take place, at least not in the near future. So we as the church, how do we now become a key player of society to help people, to help these consumers of the new media to remain emotionally, psychologically, and socially healthy? The proliferation of communications has probably brought us even further from fulfilling the mandate of Inter Mirifica than ever before. I think before the internet or the new media, before the new media became so widespread, perhaps the church was kind of getting closer to the fulfillment of this mandate. And by mandate, I'm talking about the one that was mentioned in Inter Mirifica, the mandate to instill a human and Christian spirit into media, right? But now that it's so rampant, I think it has brought us further from the fulfillment of this mandate. And undoubtedly, corporations are shaping culture and society more powerfully than the church is doing. This we cannot deny, even if we don't like to acknowledge this reality. I think it's real. Our young people are more beholden to what they consume on the new media, and probably not just the young people, but even adults are more beholden to what they consume on the new media than, say, what their pastors are preaching in church. And it's reality. So the challenge remains for us to use communication platforms to evangelize this culture. And that is very much still the mandate from Inter Mirifica. Recently, this pandemic, in a sense, it has forced us to do this as a knee-jerk reaction, because we've had to bring our masses online, devotional prayers online, faith formation, teaching the faith online. So we kind of had to react and go online. So yes, we have done a little bit more than before the pandemic, right? But still, the conclusion of my paper is that we are still not doing enough. And very often, as the church, we are not actually willing to invest into the development of skill as well as communication infrastructure for this to take place in a more concerted way and in a more effective way. So that is a summary of my paper. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your paper, but we'll have more Q&A later. Certainly, with the rise of the internet, where there's so many voices being heard nowadays, this kind of like scattergun approach to communication is something that I think not just the church as an institution, but Christians as individuals need to think about how to navigate through this type of environment. So I'm sure there'll be questions during the Q&A as well for this. But for now, we're going to move on. So I'd like to invite Mr. Doulos Paul Lee to speak. He's on his chapter called Christian Ethics of Communication, Perspectives from Behavioral Science. Mr. Doulos Paul Lee is a Malaysian and currently works as a manager for the Central Bank of Malaysia. He holds an MSc in Cognitive and Decision Science from the University College London. Mr. Doulos Paul Lee is a research fellow in behavioral science at CHRISTE. So please join me in welcoming him on to speak.
Yeah. Thanks, Mei Yang, and thanks, Sherman and the other panelists. Thanks for inviting me to write and to share my paper. Let me share my screen first and foremost. Okay. Are you all seeing this? Are you all seeing it? Yes, okay. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, so my paper is entitled Christian Ethics of Communication, Perspective from Behavioral Science. I think as Dr. Jonathan Chan says in his chapter that communication has always been at the heart of the Christian faith and tradition. So in my chapter, I actually tried to reflect on this, on Christian ethics, and also to actually think about how as humans, as how we process information, and also as what Deacon Sherman has said, in light of the pandemic and the age of this new media. So I think the starting point of my article is that as Christians, we are all committed to speaking the truth in our speech and action. So here, I think at the start of my article, I put this verse. So I think basically in everything that we say, I think our goal is ultimately to that for it to be pleasing and acceptable to God. Okay, and I think this, so one of the other intention of the article as to why I wrote this chapter is also because communication, although it's something that we do very often, we often take a lot of things for granted. And this is where in the article I try to be quite practical in the 3 points that I have listed down, and also to actually bring out some behavioral insights in all 3 articles. So the first point that I wrote in my chapter is, sorry, how come it's not going? Sorry, yes. The first point of my article is that although we as Christians we seek to speak the truth, the manner in which we speak this truth must be helpful to others. Okay, so I think in scripture it's quite clear that that we are to speak to others with love, with grace, and also although communication is the transmission of information, it is not only the transmission of information. There are also other aspects involved. For example, non-verbal communication, the tone in which we actually convey to others also really matters. So therefore, in summary, in my chapter, I said that when we seek to be helpful, that means that we actually try to be encouraging and to uplift others. There are 2 behavioral factors which I cited in the paper. So first is cognitive load, and second is the framing effect. I think as for cognitive load, I think we are all aware that as humans we have limited resources, be it in our attention span. This is why we actually need rest, we actually need food, and I think as Sherman has said that in this age we are constantly bombarded with information, so this is quite tiring. Yeah, and also I think research has shown that when we are tired, the quality of our decisions are actually impacted. Okay, and the second point is the framing effect. So I think all of us as consumers of news, we know that how any news headline is written actually affects whether we actually read the article or not. The more interesting the headline is, the more likely we will actually click and actually read it. And so I think just to demonstrate this framing effect, let's say if we have 100 people and 10 have died and 90 have survived, we can actually frame it in a way that okay, 10 people have died from the vaccine, let's say, or we can say that 90 people have survived. So I think what I'm trying to demonstrate is that the way we actually convey information is also very important. And as Christians, when we communicate, I think our imperative is actually to seek to be not only truthful but also helpful in the manner that we actually communicate. Okay, the second point that I wrote in my chapter is that when we communicate, we are to think about how best we are to love our neighbor. So we are all of us humans, we are social creatures. What we say and do actually affect others, and our behaviors are also actually shaped by how we interact with each other. Although I think especially in the West, there is this idea about freedom and independence, but actually research has shown that how we behave is actually a lot dependent on how others behave. I think just to share some examples, like I think there are research on that shows that when we inform people that their energy consumption is much lower, sorry, it's much higher than their neighbors, they actually uh, tend to decrease their energy consumption more than giving them pure information saying that it is good for the environment. So this is, I mean, we are aware of things like peer pressure, and so social norms are very important in shaping behavior. I mean, one example during the pandemic, I mean, is about masking. Even masking. I mean, I think the social norm in Asia, we take it for granted, or we are very we voluntarily mask. But as you can read in the news, in the West, there's a lot of controversy about freedom. Although I think I'm slightly simplifying things, but I think the point that I want to make is that social norms and how we behave will affect others as well. So as we can see that our behavior is not solely driven by our own individual will or desire. Okay, so why am I sharing this? I think in the article I wrote some reasons as to how realizing how we speak and how we act actually affect others. So I think what I try to argue in the paper, that this insight that you have from behavioral research relates to the scriptural injunction to love our neighbor, because this means that if we have the power to shape how others speak and actually do, therefore with this power we can actually encourage others. We can actually remind others what Scripture has said. We can encourage others to behave in a manner that is pleasing to God. We can remind others to pray. We can also remind others that we do care for them. And also I think I drew attention to how these are some of the practical ways that we can support each other during this challenging time. Because I think during the pandemic, a lot of us are suffering, not only mentally but also but because of also loss of livelihood. So in summary, what I intend, my main point of this point is that an important ethical principle for communication is to consider the impact of our words and actions on our neighbors. So as Christians, the freedom that we have comes, the freedom that we have to speak. We must remember that just as Christ has come and saved us from eternal death, and being followers of Christ, we are to act and speak in a manner that is worthy and pleasing to God. The third point that I have is that we are to be gracious. We should seek to be gracious and humble in our words. So I think research has shown that we are more often more gracious when it comes to evaluating our own self compared to others. So I think psychologists call it fundamental attribution error. We are more quick to judge others just take for example, if you are involved in an accident, if we are the one who hit someone else, we will say it's due to us being tired or whatever. But if it's others hit us, we will really condemn and judge them lah. So as humans, I think that we are quick to judge first before we seek to understand. However, I think Scripture tells us to be humble, to show grace and kindness to each other. So as we remember that Christ, having humbled himself, so we are all sinners when we are redeemed by the grace and mercy of God. So again, I think in the chapter I also drew this to how we are to react to the pandemic. And so I think I wrote there that we are to be kind in our words, support others, and help those in need. So I think in conclusion, what I intend to argue is that our words reflect who we are and who we belong to. So let us speak in love, seek to be helpful, seek how to best love our neighbor, and seek to be gracious and humble. Thank you.
Good to us. I particularly appreciate what you said. I mean, it caught my attention right away. It's not just important to be truthful, but also to be helpful. And it's something that I'm taking away from this session. It's very, very good. We're going to move on to, again, save your questions for the Q&A session. So if you have questions for Mr. Delosley, save it for a short while later. Okay, so our fourth speaker today is Miss Annie Ling, who will be presenting from her section, Communication, Interaction Dynamics. So Miss Annie Ling is currently the only certified personality and human relations facilitator and growth accompanist in the country. So upon graduating from University Science Malaysia in the field of humanities, she worked for over 25 years in various management roles and in different industries of the corporate sector. So Annie is a specially invited contributor by CHRISTE for this book. So please welcome her to share a few words.
Thank you, Meng Ho. I'd like to thank Deacon Sherman, also Pauline, who got me involved in this project. So it's my pleasure to be able to contribute this. And I'm really very happy to hear even from Jonathan talk about human-to-human interaction, and Deacon share about the social media and the way things are. And also by Dulos, when you talk about us being part of the communication and being responsible the way that we are. So this article that I actually contributed and wrote about is about the communication dynamics, how we as a person, as an individual, as being created to be a wonderful person, we have that relational capacity deep within us to foster good communication. So there is hope in mankind in the way we relate with another person, that we build and foster good relationship. And to look at that is that because communication is central in our everyday life. Today, during the pandemic, instead of saying hello to people and with a smile, today we can't see the smile because we're all masked, instead of a hug, and hellos is now replaced with a lot of communication via the social media. Privileged communication between family members and good friends. And yeah, that is the way the new norm is, to stay safe and still get connected. So we are, because communication makes us, we thrive in communication. They put a smile in our face, put a warmth in our heart when we communicate with person. And because communication is really a dynamic between me and another person, or me and the group that I am communicating with. It could be a church group, it could be a community that I'm in, or in an interest group, how I am in the way that I communicate. So this paper that I wrote is actually based on the human psychology, on our day-to-day interaction with another person. So we look at it, communication seems very easy. I say something to somebody, somebody responds back to me, but actually there are many different dynamics in this seemingly simple communication. So the four dynamics that I'm going to look at, that I put it in the paper, is actually to look, there are four. There is actually the persons that we are communicating with. Yeah, I think Dolores shared a bit about that. And myself in the communication. So the person I'm communicating, or the group I'm communicating with, and me in that communication. And we look at the messages in our communication. And lastly, the situation and context of the communication. So in that, the first one, which I talk about, the person that we are communicating with. The person that we're communicating with, that could be an individual, a family member, or in a group that I'm in. The way they respond to me can have a certain effect on me. The way that I can perceive that, whether the person is listening to me, or by their nodding, or by their quick responses to my message, I can sense that I am well received by the other person. And this responsiveness from the other person allows me to feel that I am engaged, that I am welcome, that I have this sense of belonging to this group or to this person. So it encourages me to communicate more. Yeah. So the positive response allows me to also respond in a greater, with more life, with more enthusiasm. And for example, if I'm in a group, then I am asked to do something, then when I start to organize, people are responding quickly, and I can sense that, wow, I am well received in the group, and it can make me happy. Likewise, if the other person do not receive me, I perceive that they do not respond, then I can have a sense that perhaps I don't belong to this group, that I'm not so welcome. So it has the other effect in me. So the person that I'm communicating with can influence my way of being. And now I look at me in the communication. Myself, when I am communicating, normally by, if I'm using a text, I'm texting, right? Or I'm typing my messages in WhatsApp and so forth. However, it is more than that. It is me as a person that's communicating. We look at, there are 4 areas in me that's communicating. Yeah? One is my deep self, my deep value, my relational capacity, perhaps my deep love for the other person, my deep, my understanding, my good listening skill, my openness and respect I live for the other person. And if I can live from this, wow, I can really impact the way I communicate, because I can communicate with love, I can communicate with deep respect, and then it can enhance good communication. At the same time, I also have my thoughts. You know, when I look at the article or when I look at what the person sent to me, I can already have perception what is being said, or I can perceive this person, perhaps of my history. I may have either a good perception or I may have a negative perception. So this can also influence the dynamic of that communication that I have with this person. The other one is actually my feeling, yeah? My feeling, if I'm feeling happy, you know, I am excited about things, when I communicate with the other person, it can show through my choices of word, you know, I'm so happy to hear this, I'm so delighted, you know, it's fantastic, wonderful. So we give the vibration of that openness and love towards the other, and they can receive and they can reciprocate, and we can build good relationship through the way that we feel. And the other is also true. When I'm upset, angry, when I communicate, I may also choose words that may not reflect friendliness, may not be life-giving to the other. So the way that I feel can sometimes influence the way I communicate. And also my body also speaks in the way we communicate. My body, if I'm well rested, I had a good night's sleep, you know, in the morning I wake up, I'm very chirpy, chirpy, energetic. And I can sense that, you know, if I receive anything not so nice remark, I can still put it aside because I have more patience in me. I'm not so easily disturbed. Compared to if I'm not feeling so well, I'm not well rested last night, I didn't sleep at all, then I can sense that when somebody says something, I may feel a bit more sensitive. I may have the lack of patience to communicate in a way that is. So what it means that the other person can influence more the way I communicate because my body is not really feeling that great. So it is to really observe the whole of us, my thoughts, my feelings, my body, but to note that we have this great relational capacity that we are made that way. This great relational capacity of love, of kindness, of compassion, of understanding, of openness. When we live the best on us, from us, on who we are, we can influence communication in a good way. And the others is the message that we communicate. Today we look at in social media, in our WhatsApp, the messages that we type can be quite limited and may not reveal the full story that we want to share or say. And this sometimes can influence the way we communicate, and that can lead to misunderstanding. So we can look at how we can, whether our message is clear, is it concise, is it structured, to help in our communication. And also to note that, last but not least, about the situation and the context. Sometimes certain things are better discussed. We need to have a time or space because the topic is really heavy. Perhaps set aside time, not feel rushed, so that we can have a good communication, so that it can foster, although the topic is really tough, but through living out the best of ourselves and the environment that we create for the communication, it can foster a stronger bond between myself and the other person. It could be my spouse, it could be my parents, it could be my children or friends. So these are some of the areas that I touch upon that actually can influence the way we communicate. I do believe that we are a force for good. That means we can communicate responsibly. We can communicate from the very best of ourselves, from who we are, from our deep love for another person, and for what we are called to be by our Christian faith, to communicate well, to communicate love to the other. So briefly, this is what is shared in my article today. So that's it. Thank you, Menyo.
Thank you, Annie. Those are some that's a great starting point for, I think, all of us to start self-reflecting a little bit on how we communicate and how we interact with others. Definitely something to think about. Our last speaker for today, by no means the least, is Dr. Pauline Leong, who will be sharing on her chapter, Communicating Responsibly through Social Media. So Dr. Pauline Leong is currently Associate Professor in the Department of Communication at Sunway University, Malaysia. The PhD in Political Communication was conferred by Monash University, Malaysia, and Pauline is a Research Fellow in Communication at CHRISTE. So please, Pauline, over to you.
Thank you, Mingyu. I'll be sharing slides for this. Okay. Right. Okay, everyone. The chapter that I wrote for this book covers aspects of communication through social media. Now, social media is an integral part of our communication network. I'm pretty sure everyone here has either a smartphone, a tablet, or a notebook. Everyone here, I think, would be using some sort of social media platform, be it Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram. We are able to communicate with a wide network of people, but are we communicating responsibly? In my book chapter, I touch on various issues relating to communication via social media, right? Things like cyberbullying, cyber stalking, trolling, and hate speech. Other issues that I also covered include doxing, which is trawling the internet for someone's personal information, as well as cancel culture, which is a practice of withdrawing public support for someone in protest. Right? But I think the most difficult problem we face today while using social media is the issue of fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. Okay, and this is clearly seen in the recent case of a senior lady in Singapore who ended up in hospital because of the advice of her church friends. Her church friends told her to take ivermectin to prevent COVID-19 instead of going for a second vaccination. Okay, this was actually released by the lady's daughter. Okay, and it was all found in her WhatsApp. Right, and as you can see, right, in the WhatsApp messages, right, her friends told her that God sent Mother Mary, Saint Joseph, and Saint Michael to warn people not to take the vaccination. And suddenly, a Freemason was being involved in the vaccination process. And on top of that, right, the church members also illegally procured ivermectin, sold it to her, and told her how to self-medicate. Okay, but in the end, what happened? It was her daughter who had to foot the medical bill, not those friends who gave her the advice and sold her the drug. Okay. I'm not sure how those friends of hers ended up thinking that ivermectin is a safer alternative to vaccination. But I suspect it is probably due to all the misinformation that has been forwarded to them via WhatsApp, but probably from very well-meaning friends and family members. Okay. It is very unfortunate that they did not cross-check the information, okay, and blindly accepted whatever that they received. Okay, so as this is the next slide, this shows the daughter explaining what happened, okay, and how the fights that happened between the mother and daughter, and the things that were given to the mother, the information that's given, all probably via Google as well. Okay, right, and so my point here is that why is it that they receive this information but not find the actual official information? If they had found and if they had been following the news properly, they would have seen the Singapore Archbishop William Goh's pastoral letter where he shared his experience of being vaccinated and encouraged his flock to get vaccinated as well for the good of the community. Right? In fact, there have been questions asked about the morality of receiving the vaccines, and there have been answers as well. Okay, right? And furthermore, the Pope himself has been vaccinated and has urged people to get vaccinated. Right, even in Malaysia, okay, let me show you, even in Malaysia, right, what we have is as well, a pastoral letter from the Archbishop, about vaccinations, about COVID-19, as well as, immunization. Why is it that people tend to follow all these information that they receive, but not the official ones. It's because of the possible echo chambers that that have been created due to the algorithms in social media. I think that Deacon Sherman mentioned this, about the whistleblower, and I'm going to cover it as well. Okay, how these echo chambers are created is because we like certain posts. Okay, we like certain posts, we receive certain information, and Facebook keeps on promoting that information, such that we only receive information that conforms with our belief system and nothing and no alternative information. So we become more and more entrenched in our belief system. Okay, so let me show you a short video about how these echo chambers are created.
It's human nature. We surround ourselves with people we agree with. And the internet has only made it easier. For many, Twitter is a place to have existing views reinforced. Often without realizing it, a lot of us choose to live in an echo chamber. A place where it can seem like everyone on Earth...
Can you hear the sound? Yes, okay.
Yes,
just like us. And Facebook? Well, Facebook takes it even further. Of course, you can hide those posts from your goofy aunt, but Facebook actually does a lot of that work for you, behind the scenes. It knows what you like and what you comment on, what brands you follow, what ads grab your attention, events you're attending, and publications you read. Facebook uses all that data to feed its algorithms, and those algorithms choose what you see. And if you know where to look, you can actually see what Facebook thinks you like. Your interests, your hobbies, and even your political views. The result is what's become known as the filter bubble, where your timeline is filled with opinions you share. Facebook actually makes money off knowing those things. They sell you and your filtered bubble to advertisers. Those advertisers will pay more to get their products in front of people that are likely to buy them. And if you're seeing things you like, you'll spend more time on Facebook, seeing more ads, and making the company more money. But does the bubble keep us well informed? It's a tough question to answer, especially while the technology is still changing so fast. But one thing's for sure, that technology has the power to make us more connected or more isolated than ever.
Okay, so we have to be aware that we are actually in a filter bubble, and that the information that we receive is actually artificially manipulated, okay, through technology, right? And so what Deacon talked about, right? This lady, she used to work with Facebook, okay, and you can see that in the article, she says that Facebook prioritizes, okay, profit over public good, and it has actually been a source which enabled a lot of hate news, hate speech, a lot of cyber trolling, etc., etc. Okay, so so we have to be very careful when we are using social media. Okay, the awareness would help us. So how do we avoid these situations? Okay, I think media literacy is very important. Being media literate and media savvy, we need to develop critical thinking skills to separate the wheat from the chaff. We need to be aware and evaluate all information we receive rather than believing it wholesale. We have to be skeptical. Okay, so for example, we have a meme. This is a meme that has been going around and viral for years. Okay, just because it has a picture of Pope Francis and there's a name, his name is there, doesn't mean it comes from him. Okay, so it is very clear that when you see this, right, you have to be very critical. Would Pope Francis say that we don't believe in God, right? So if you go and Google, just Google it. It's very simple. You will find that this is a fake quote, right? And same thing. Do dogs go to heaven, right? If you go and check notes, right, they will check. See, it is fake. It's false, right? So be aware that not everything that you receive is true. Okay. Right, and lastly, I would like to share how we can go about it. Check and recognize, be very skeptical. Who's the author, when is it published, etc. Look out for quotes that are suspicious, okay, and always think before you share. One of my beef is that, a lot of people would say, forwarded as received, and that really irritates me because please do not forward as you receive. Check before you, check when you receive, think before you forward. Okay, and we can take heed from Pope Francis' prayer for countering fake news. Okay, communication, as you can see, is very important, as all the authors have talked about. Okay, and with this prayer, right, let's hope that there will be more responsible communication in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pauline. So important to think about media literacy and how we need it. All right. I mean, I'm also from communications. And one of the things that I always think about is it's not about how other people need media literacy. It's actually, we need to start from us. We need to think about media literacy. So with that, those are all our contributors. And now what I want to do is I want to do just a little formal book launch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite all the speakers. They all have the book covers loaded on their phones. What I want to get them to do is later on, when we're all ready, to hold the phone to the screen as best they can, despite the background, for us to all have a look. And again, because we're all online, we can't really go around the room shaking hands and congratulating people. I'd like to invite everyone, if you're comfortable, okay, you're not compelled to switch on your cameras, unmute yourself, or to use reaction. At the count of 3, make some noise, congratulate everyone, sing some praises, and I encourage you to participate. Otherwise, it's only going to be just me, and that would be quite awkward. So we'll just do that for a little while. Just make some noise. If you interrupt each other, you're forgiven. Nobody cares. All right. Just yeah, just make some noise. So okay. So all contributors, handphones ready. Get it well positioned. And I'll try my best to take 1 or 2 screenshots. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me get my screen ready. Okay. Okay. 1. Okay, unmute yourself, video on. You can put reaction if you're shy, it's okay. 1, 2, 3. Congratulations, guys, well done.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well done, everyone. Great job.
Great. Yep, okay, so I got the screenshot as best I could. With that, I'd like to just very quickly mention that the book can already be downloaded on the CHRISTE website. You can go there and you can download a copy for yourself. It is free of charge, right? So it's available for everyone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the timer for Q&A. Just a couple of pointers so that it goes smoothly. We have about 20 minutes or so. So you can do this in any way. Just raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question. You can also post it in the chat. I'll try my best to get through to it. It's preferred that if you're addressing one of the contributors in particular, just mention who you're addressing it to. And I anticipate there are quite a lot of questions, so try to keep it to 1 question per person. Okay, so you can use the chat function too. I'll be checking it from time to time. All right, so I'm opening the floor. Anyone with any questions? No need to be shy. Okay. Maybe just to get the ball rolling, I'll ask a question. Okay, so I have some. I won't ask all because I want to open it up to everyone here. But just to get the ball rolling. So I have a question for. I start from the last speaker. So for Dr. Pauline. Okay, so she talked about social media, and all the cancel culture and all the different pitfalls that come with it. So with our pandemic, all of us have been forced online a lot for the last 3 years. Church has changed the way online church has changed the way we experience our faith on an everyday level. So just in your opinion, in your experience, what's something good that came out of this online church experience that you feel that as the pandemic winds down now, hopefully, what's something that we must keep in terms of our online habits and practices in relation to our Christian faith? What's something that you feel we've picked up and we should keep it?
I think that during the pandemic, right, the fact is that some of the community members actually grew closer, right, because they prayed more regularly, even though it's via Zoom or via WhatsApp, right? So the sense of community, the sense of when we can't go to church, when we can't see each other, the sense of absence makes the heart grow fonder. So I think that that I felt in my community, that really helped in terms of building up that spirit. And I hope that even as we transition back into normality somewhat, that this would be a stepping stone, a foundation, right? For in terms of building ties and having a discipline to pray together.
Thank you. Okay, any questions? Oh, so there's one in the chat. So it's addressed to in general. So as Christians, we are to communicate with charity. How to divert or enforce a communication in a group that are lacking this, lacking charity, basically. Any volunteer want to give this a go? I think maybe this is suitable for Annie to talk about. So I'll repeat the question for you. So as Christians, we are to communicate with charity. How do we divert or enforce a communication in a group that's lacking this behavior, this attribute?
Oh, sorry, Polly.
No, Annie, you go first. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, we look at we cannot we cannot control what other people may say or how the group may behave. But what we can look at, me as a person, myself in reaction to the other person. So if I see something that is not really lacking in this, so for me, when I communicate with them, let's say if it's addressed to me, for me, I can also sense, I can live from the best of me. That means I connect with my good self. I can connect to my charity self within me when I communicate, so that I'm able to use words that are meaningful, words that are relational building, words that encourage better way of communicating in the group. Yeah, so I can live from my deep conscience what I feel that is the best way to communicate in that group. I think Pauline has some experience on this. Maybe she wants to add on.
Yes, Pauline.
Yes. I think, Brian, if I'm not mistaken, you're referring to like social media groups, like say WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups, etc. Right? So I share my experience. I'm actually an administrator of my neighborhood WhatsApp group, and it's not been easy managing people, with from diverse backgrounds, etc. And yes, sometimes people do not talk with charity. So I think how I managed it was that I created a set of guidelines. But these guidelines was not only from me. I started off with one or two, but with contribution from everyone. So everyone had a hand in the guidelines. So we came up with about 10 guidelines, and everyone agreed to it. Okay, and of course there were some that were unhappy, so I had to enforce it. And what happened is that other people also supported when I had to enforce it. But like what Annie said, we use words that are charitable. We do not respond hate with hate. We respond hate or criticisms with love. So while I maintain, while I, try to enforce it, I also choose words that are neutral. I choose words that are respectful. And I said, yes, I understand where you're coming from, but the group says this, the group. So in other words, I respond with charity, but I still maintain the stand of, the community guidelines that we call it in that group. And it's not just me alone. I get other people to also, chip in and support. So they see that it is not just the admin administering, but it's actually a collective understanding from other members in the group.
Thanks, that's great. Yeah, any questions? Yeah, I saw a hand go up. Yeah, please feel free.
Good evening, Anbu here. I'm addressing this question to Dr. Shaman. Dr. Deacon Shaman, from the feedback of all the authors, I see the weight of this book will be more on the psychological part. But because I haven't read this book, so I would like to get the feedback. The weight of this book, when we wrote, are they more on philosophical or on the psychological? How to be more precise is in our communication with or how we apply the communication. Do the book relates how we are with God, and how we should relate to people on psychological? I mean, this is on philosophical. And and it really emphasized that to see this in the communication also.
Thank you, Anbu. From my study of these chapters, of course, I had to study them because I had to do the editing and the arrangement and all that of the entire book. So from my understanding of the chapters, chapter 1 is, it provides a more theological framework for us to understand what are the different dimensions of communication. And chapter 1 basically tells us that we human beings are created to communicate precisely because God communicates. And since we are created in his image and likeness, therefore we too communicate just like God communicates. So it's a very theological thing. And chapter 2, which is my chapter, actually talks about how the church as a whole, all right, has interacted with this call to communicate the gospel and to engage culture more effectively since the Second Vatican Council. So it's something that is both, there's something theological there, but also practical from the perspective of the church as an institution. And then the third chapter will be the one written by Doulos. Now he gives Christian principles for us to embrace in our own Christian life on how we engage in communication with people, how we disseminate information, how do we make sure that when we communicate to people, it is done out of love for our neighbor rather than for our own self-motivated agenda. So now it has been translated into something that is practical in terms of Christian principles that we embrace. Then chapter 4 is Annie, who writes from a very, I would say, a psycho-spiritual perspective, but in a very practical way, how we relate to other people one-to-one as individuals in a way that's healthy for ourselves as well as healthy for the people that we are relating to. Okay. Then finally, Dr. Pauline speaks about the platforms, how we engage the platforms of the new media, and how to do it in such a way that we engage wisely and in a way that's discerning. And so that also is something that's very practical. So I think that we have both a good mix. The first 2 chapters are pretty theological and very church-centered. The third chapter is quite spiritual in terms of living out communication as a spiritual practice, with certain principles. And then the third and fourth chapters talk about how to do it, right? The how to do it. So I think it's a good mix, which was what we wanted initially. When we came up with this book project, we wanted to have the whole spectrum of communication taught in the book, so that it's not just something that's theological, but then we don't see the practical implications of it. And if it's something that's just totally practical without a proper biblical and theological foundation, also it doesn't work well. As Christians, we are taught to understand our faith, the teachings of our faith, the teachings of scripture, the teachings of the church, and also how that works out in living our life in a very practical way. So I would like to think that the book has a balance of this whole spectrum of thinking. That's my perspective of the book. I don't know if the other contributors, the other authors have also read the book. So I don't know how you might perceive it in your reading. Maybe you can share as well.
Yep. Anyone want to add on a little bit? What I'll say is that the book is now freely available on the website. Doing some advertising here. Please be sure to download it and read through it. And I'm sure the feedback would be very welcome, not just for editor, but also for the contributors. So thank you for the question. I have a question here from Sakti. It's a very general question, as in any one of you can jump in. Has the pandemic created the eventual rise of online church that would eventually replace the, I suppose it means physical church of today? Anyone want to give this a shot? Among the contributors, please don't make me pick people.
Maybe I can share my perspective of this, but I hasten to say that my sharing comes from a very particularly Catholic perspective. Okay, so the other contributors, feel free to respond from your the perspectives of your different traditions. Okay, but in the Catholic Church, I think that we do take quite a unique perspective on this matter, on this whole idea of the online church, because Catholic spirituality centers a lot on sacramentality. All right, so for us, the Catholic life revolves around the reception of the sacraments. We believe that a priest, a man who is ordained to become a priest, and this is the priest who gives the sacraments to us, right? So this man who is ordained into the person of Christ. He is configured into Christ, and the physical presence of the priest in the person of Christ is necessary for us to receive the sacraments. All right. Therefore, for us to totally convert our church life into an online kind of spirituality or online life doesn't bid well for the Catholic senses. Okay. So, for example, the Sunday masses that we celebrate in our Catholic Church, yes, we acknowledge that it has not been possible to attend masses in the church. Therefore, people take to the television to watch televised masses. But somehow, in the teaching of the Catholic Church, in the sacramental teaching of the Catholic Church, witnessing a mass that's celebrated on television does not equate participating in a mass or attending a mass. What you've done is watch a mass that is celebrated and that's being telecasted, but because you are not physically present there and the priest does not stand in front of you materially in person, therefore you have not actually been a part of that mass. All right, this is not to say that watching it online does not bring any kind of benefit, any kind of spiritual benefit. It does, but strictly speaking, from the Catholic perspective, you have not actually attended mass, right? That's why during this pandemic, despite it being possible for people to witness masses or watch masses being celebrated online, on television and on the internet, the bishops still had to give a dispensation. That means an exemption to all the people from attending mass physically, right? And in many places, like for example, in America, I think many dioceses, the bishops have already lifted that exemption, which means from then on, attending mass just by watching it online, it's not acceptable anymore. They have to make themselves present physically to participate materially in the mass that's being celebrated. And this comes from a very uniquely Catholic perspective of the sacraments, right? The physical presence, materiality is a non-negotiable in Catholic spirituality. Yeah. So I think that there are certain things from the Catholic perspective, there are certain things that can continue online. For example, teaching the faith or a community gathering to pray together, yes. But anything to do with the sacraments cannot be replaced by online activity.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to add on to that? Yeah.
I think maybe I'll just make a few points. I think one point is, I think as humans we are embodied beings, which means that the way we relate to others is also through our physical presence, and so the way that we relate to, the way that we process information. So I think my second point would be, I think when we see during the pandemic the effect of social isolation, I think something that I also briefly touched on in the chapter, is it has huge cost on our mental well-being lah. So just taking these 2 points, I'm not sure whether is really both an ideal and is really sustainable if the body of Christ just meets online. So I think yeah.
I think this is a question that we'll have to continue to observe as it is currently unfolding. I think the subject of digital church got accelerated in the last 2 years, and now it's a topic for conversation for a lot of people. So I think wait and see, and maybe in the future, CHRISTE can do another forum just on this subject alone. I think it would be quite fun. Hint.
Meng-Yo,
yeah.
I think you should also contribute a response to this question. This is your field of expertise.
No, today is all on the contributors and all of you, but I think it's an interesting subject, and I think that okay, so my only contribution to this would be, apart from all the things that's been said, I'll only say that there are two things that we can think about. I'm not giving answers, not that there are any. Is we have to think about the authentic experience of Christian experience. What does that mean to everyone? And what role does materiality play in our experience of faith? So these are kind of two things that can get us started thinking about whether the online church will persist in perpetuity or not, right? So my mini contribution here. Any other questions? While waiting, I actually have a question for Dr. Jonathan Chan. You're talking about the different dimensions of communication in the theology of communication. I just want to know what you think about whether it's important or how important it is to factor in the audience experience and expression, or the human to God, not just God to human, but the human to God aspect of communication, how we as people relate to God, and whether this has any room for further exploration in any study of the theology of communication.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Mingyo. How does the human aspect factor into communication with the divine? And does our own experience have anything to do with it? Am I understanding your question correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly what
Gosh. Yeah, I think so. I think it opens up a whole realm of the sorts of kind of questions that we can ask when we think about communication. And I think it's a particularly unexplored and foggy area. I mean, we're so familiar with, as you say, materiality and time-bound communication, that is human-to-human communication. In one sense, the way that the divine communicates to creation is a mystery, I think. And I think I tried to touch on this in the paper that I wrote. I think the best example of this perhaps is what Calvin says, what John Calvin, not the cartoon character by Watterson Calvin, when he describes the experience that we have speaking and appearing to be in conversation with God in the Old Testament. He says that, so it looks like God is having a conversation with us, right? I speak first, then God speaks, or God asks a question, then I reply, and then we appear to be having a conversation that is indexed in time. But really, how does that work if God is outside of time? And how does that look like on God's side of things? A God's eye view, to use Augustine's language. What would that be if God experiences everything in a single instant? I have no idea. And so Calvin says, well, it looks like God is having a conversation with us, but really what's happening is he's lisping to us in the same way that a nursemaid lisps to a baby in order that he or she might understand. I suppose considering that side of communications is fascinating and a mystery, and I think there's scope for a lot more to be said. And how our own experience factors into it, I think, yes, it's incredibly important. I suppose another way of thinking about this might be eschatologically thinking about the end times. What's it going to be like in the beatific vision once we are resurrected? Are we still going to be bound within time? I haven't thought too much about this, but I think off the top of my head, the answer would be, I think that's so. I think to experience the succession of time in order that we might experience something is something that's essential to our own beings. So there's that side to it. And is our enjoyment of it important? Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure if that goes some way to answering your question, Mingyao. Is there a follow-up question?
No. I was just about to say that I hope to hear more from you in the future about this, because it's really interesting, and just hearing you talk about it, I think it's.
Oh, thanks, Mingyao. I'll do my best. If Sherman comes and knocking again, I'd be more than happy to write something more.
So some of these questions that are actually just opening up opportunities for even more conversation in the future, for even more forums and workshops, and where we have a lot of space to explore these kinds of things, like the timelessness of God and all that. I was going to say a whole can of worms, but I don't think that's the right description for it. So, yeah.
Very accurately so, though.
Yeah. I have two questions on the chat that are quite related. So I'm going to read out both questions and then maybe we can just pick it up from there. So I have a question from Edmund Khan. How should we communicate effectively the theological and practical ideas in this book of the younger generation of people who are enclosed in their own respective echo chambers, as this requires them to detach themselves quite significantly from the bubble of new media? And Shikni's question related to that: how will parents living in digital world communicate our faith and God's love effectively to children and teenagers? I have a 20-year-old and I think I've lost her to the digital world despite us parents trying our very best to lead and guide her in the Catholic faith. It is very challenging. My only hope is to totally rely on God to prick her conscience. So two related questions about communicating effectively to young people who can be very immersed in digital habits, social media habits, and so on and so forth. How do we communicate, reach out to them effectively? Open to any of the contributors.
For me, right, the echo chamber, I'm also very careful because I realized that I could be in my own echo chamber as well. And what I do is I actually add myself into different other groups, the groups that I would normally not be friends with. Okay, so when it comes to like politics, for example, I also add myself into the Malay community, and other communities, so that I get the feed that comes, into my Facebook timeline will be different ideas that come up. So I think that one way you could communicate is that you could share, let's say with your friends or with your children or your network, share different ideas, different articles. Okay, so that when it comes, they at least hopefully it will appear on the timeline. Okay, with regards to Brian's question on the ignorant, what I would actually do is that I would actually find articles, okay, and I would post the articles for that person, and hopefully that person would read it and it would trigger the person's thinking and ask questions. But then again, if the person is very entrenched, it's going to be difficult. I think the best is to pray or to talk face to face. But the charitable way is just to give information, and hopefully, that person would bite it, would address it. Yeah. As for teenagers, I think for parents especially, I think that social media is one way, but I think that you need to talk to them, you need to communicate, you need to do things with them. Talk about God, and maybe through actions, because they live in such a world of social media. I think we need to give another form of communication through perhaps offline. That's the other way to drag them, from online to offline. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the last question, because time is up, the last question I'm going to direct it straight at you. This is Brian's question. As Catholics, part of our spiritual works of mercy is to instruct the ignorant. How can we do this in a charitable way via social media for posts that seem to contradict our faith in varying degrees? Sometimes it is easier to advise face to face, but not via social media. What do you think?
Sorry, I'm still thinking about it. I think someone at the end of Pauline who said earlier, answer to the first question, which is when we communicate, we have control over how we actually communicate. Wait, sorry, I don't get the question. So I think the question is asking to respond to other posts that contradict our faith, right? Right. Is that my correct understanding?
Yep, and how to be charitable in the face of these kinds of very very different content that.
Yeah, I guess based on the 3 principles that I wrote earlier, I guess the key is that I think it's very easy nowadays to communicate, like what Sherman said. It's all with one click. So I guess my answer to this would be when you communicate, be intentional and think through before you communicate. Whether are you being helpful, whether what you are saying can be misinterpreted, is it showing grace? Yeah, so because I think that is the extent that I would to go to lah. I think sorry, I know it's very general, it's a very general response, but I guess these are the general principles that we can apply to, because I think we can only be in control. I guess in communication, it is a two-way thing. So in responding to something that contradicts the faith, if the other person is not really genuine about engaging with you, there's only so much that you can do, right? You can be kind, you can be generous, but if the other person decides to actually not take that generosity, then I guess as long as you yourself have done something that is pleasing to God and is in accordance to your faith and in defending your faith. So yeah, I guess that would be my take of it.
Thank you. I think that's great. So I think read his chapter to pick up those principles a little bit more and finding different ways to apply it to. So it's 4:30. We're going to end the session now, but I just want to say that, you know, a book launch is not just a launch of a book, right? It is a launch of a series of conversations. Every chapter in this book is a potential topic for discussion in so many different ways, and it's meant to grow, and hopefully we all can grow along with these conversations. So it is my hope that these sessions have been useful to everyone here, and it is my sincere hope that this book gets the attention it deserves and it plays its part in building the church, respective communities, and beyond. So once again, congratulations to everyone who put this book together, and thank you everyone for being a part of this joyous occasion. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your public holiday today.